John, of course, is the president of the John Locke Foundation. He is seen weekly on arguing with Chris Fitzsimon on NC Spin. And I'm glad you're there because you can hold your own against Chris, who I also love but never agree with. I called you to get on this morning because a couple of things. Number one, I'm just frustrated that the liberals are winning the PR battle. I mean, I said a couple of weeks ago that, Governor McCrory, all the things that they've done to bring the unemployment rate down in North Carolina, 6.5%, something like that, 6.4%. And you pick up the newspaper every day, and all you read is about the Duke coal ash spill. Well, yesterday, the governor has you and the governor have a press conference together, and you talk about all the great things that have come about for North Carolina families because of tax reform. And the front page of the News Observer basically says that school teachers aren't going to get a raise this year because of it. And I just wanted to get you on to talk about those things.
You're right to point that out. The News Observer was the only media organization to play the story that way. The other TV stations and print media simply reported that it was tax day and there were competing arguments about the value of the tax reform. And the governor and the John Locke Foundation and others had argued that it was good for the state, and some liberal groups said it was bad for the state. A very logical, straightforward presentation of the facts. The News and Observer decided to turn it into something else. And also, I will tell you that the reporter in question and I had some testy words yesterday. The other reporters asked questions. I gave answers. He decided to be combative. I didn't understand the point of that. Well, I guess I did understand the point of it, but I didn't think it was the right way to do your job.
That's what he's being told to do.
Well, yes, and the problem here is, first of all, no one has said that teachers won't get a pay increase in the 2014 legislative session. Even the legislative leader that the News Observer quoted, Jerry Tillman, who's one of the appropriators in the Senate, said that they will definitely do the starting pay plan that the governor and legislative leaders already announced. And this is a major investment of dollars. And that if the revenues are strong enough, there might be additional teacher pay raises in 2014. Otherwise, there'll be pay raises in 2015. Now, that's one legislator speaking, and the way he lays it out is certainly possible, but it's not a fact. You don't report it as saying teacher pay is not going to go up. I think the way the News Observer said was broad teacher raises unlikely. Even unlikely is a term that's more editorial than it is covering the news here.
Yeah.
But the point is, there was no context in this story about tax reform. None.
Right.
How much did a public school teacher save because the tax reform was passed? It depends on the income and the place you are, but essentially something around you essentially got around a percentage point of pay raise because your take-home pay is higher because of tax reform, and that's true if you're a public school teacher or a nurse or a construction worker or anything else.
Yeah.
So to describe this as teachers got no benefit from this, to suggest that teachers' interests are being sacrificed, is the kind of thing that's perfectly acceptable for an editorial to do. But it is not appropriate for a news story that should have provided, I think, greater context and greater discussion of the issue that was in play yesterday. The other media organizations and everybody else on both sides arguing this point recognized that tax day was a good time to talk about tax policy. And there were I made arguments about how most households in North Carolina do get a tax cut from the bill, that the best reading of the scholarly research about economic growth suggests that states with lower taxes have faster economic growth, more job creation, higher income growth. Therefore, because North Carolina did one of the most significant tax reforms in recent decades, that we're likely to have significant increases in economic growth over the next few years. That was the argument that the governor and others made. The left argued that we should have preserved the earned income tax credit and that too much of the benefits of the tax cut went to wealthy people. I don't agree with those arguments, but at least they're relevant. They're on point to what the conversation was about.
Yeah, it wasn't about teacher salaries.
Exactly. The News and Observer decided to make it about something else. And obviously, when you get into debates about the state budget, you have to consider all of the different things that affect economic growth. The governor made the point that Medicaid overspending has been a significant factor. The News and Observer decided to then basically undercut the significance of his point by talking about projections of Medicaid spending this year without talking about all the money that had been gone into Medicaid spending last year and the year before, which helps to explain the lack of large-scale teacher pay raises in the past, and the projections of Medicaid growth over the years. In other words, they were arguing with the governor point by point in a news story, and I don't think it was the right thing to do.
You can almost see the editorial meeting that took place before this, which was, you can almost see the News Observer honcho sitting around a conference room table saying, well, it's tax day. The governor's going to go out there and start ballyhooing all the great things that he's done for North Carolina families. We need a better angle than that.
That's exactly right.
So they go over to the NCAE press conference and decide to print everything that they say is fact, and anything that the governor or you or anybody says to refute that is conjecture.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. They are playing on a team rather than covering the game.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous.
That's the wrong way for them to, Henry, Republican politicians and some Democrats have complained about the Raleigh News and Observer for decades. And sometimes these complaints really, in my mind, they're just whining.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like complaining that, the end zone is 50 yards away. I mean, why isn't it 30 yards away? Just sort of one of these, why don't you just snap the ball and get going? The problem here is that the previous News and Observer, the previous leaders, they were all liberals pretty much. They had a political point of view, but they were professionals.
Yes.
And even when, for example, Governor Martin, who I'm writing his biography, when Governor Martin complained about the News and Observer, he was right that they were liberals, but a lot of times he actually, in retrospect, said, I think they were pretty fair to me on the news pages. It's not like they were out to get me every day in the news pages.
Right.
But see, today I can't say that. Today I got to say that the decisions they make, both on the editorial page and in the news pages, are much more transparently partisan than they used to be.
Yeah,
and it's just unnecessary.
It's also, I'm looking at this morning's editorial, which has to do, I need to be careful about this because it has to do with the tuition and the financial aid issue that was discussed at the Board of Governors meeting last week. Mm-hmm. But, again, it's also, they also omit pertinent information from time to time that really is relevant to the discussion. For instance, this morning, the editorial in the News Observer is dealing with the fact that many people on the Board of Governors, including yours truly, is concerned about the fact that that middle-class families, of course, this is not the spin they put on it, that part of tuition money now is going for financial aid. And we're being told that number has crept up and up and up, and we're told that it's in excess of 20% in some campuses. So the concern that we have, and I think everybody in North Carolina should have, is that, the other middle-class kid, look, it's great that it's helping send some kids to school with financial aid, but who's paying for it? And if you take a look at the number of kids that are having to borrow money to go to school, these are middle-class and low-income kids too. They may not qualify for financial aid, but, the parents of these hardworking North Carolina families are busting their butt to send their kids to school, but they're also now 20% of what they're paying is going to send somebody else to school. What's the tipping point? What's the line? What's the fairness in how much money should go to someone else in a college student's tuition? That's the question that's been posed. There's none of the spin in this editorial this morning basically is that Republicans want to start taking away financial aid from people who need it.
Of course. They can't seem to get their head around the debates that people are having today. I
Yeah.
mean, Henry, you're giving me a good example. I'll give you perhaps a more glaring example. They still think it's 1965. So every debate about anything, particularly on education, school choice, for example, or tax policy, they want to immediately say, well, it must be about race.
Right.
This is some kind of suppressed rage about civil rights. Now, they think they're being brilliant and insightful, and what they really are, they're just illustrating how way out of touch they are with reality.
Yeah.
That in the real world, people have way moved past 1965. The voter election law changes in 2013 were not some voter suppression device a la Lester Maddox.
Yeah.
And they, as much as some of my conservative friends think, well, they don't really believe any of this. This is just all propaganda to try to destroy Republicans. That's not true. They really do believe
There
some of
are
it.
some that do. I think.
Yeah, they are actual
I agree
true
with
believers.
most of the.
They live in a fantasy world
Yeah.
of their own creation in which they are standing up against segregationists.
Yeah.
They're sort of sorry that they weren't, editors and reporters in 1959 and they couldn't be involved in the great struggle. And so they're trying to recreate it today.
In
And that's just an
2014.
example. It is. It's like the folks who grew up after World War II, which was a noble war, and they sort of dream, well, I wish I could have fought in that war.
Well, and it plays right to the William Barbers of the world who are using it for personal gain.
For fundraising, for aggrandizement. I agree with that, too.
Yeah,
I mean, again, I don't want to paint with a really broad brush. There are people involved in the Moral Monday movement. I mean, I have friends I have a nephew who's involved in the Moral Monday movement, unfortunately. And I think that many of them do have good intentions. They're just poorly informed, and they are led by people who are either out for themselves or, in the case of a number of professors that are very politically active, they really do live in a fantasy world of their own creation.
Yeah. I wish I could articulate the way you articulate, John Hood. You are a wordsmith of masterful proportions. Everything that I think comes out of your mouth, but you say it so much better than anybody else can say.
What are you trying to get?
I'm nothing. You're just one of my heroes.
You're buttering me up for something.
No, I've always felt that way about you.
Well,
let me just ask you about this before we go, and I'll let you go back to work because this was kind of a last minute, spur of the moment interview. What do you think is going to happen in the legislative session? I mean, it seems to me that the leadership, including the governor, is not going to be well served if this story gets legs today, and all of a sudden across the state, we've got more discussion about there they go again. They're not going to give the school teachers raises. I just don't see that. I think they're going to find a way to do that.
Well, they will definitely do the pay raise for starting teachers.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
by the way, is a good idea. That is the highest priority objectively in our teacher compensation debate. That's the biggest problem that North Carolina has. So I think they will do that. And I think it is quite possible that they will do an across-the-board raise, though it won't be very large. And their argument will be, this is going to take us 2, 3, 4 years to do our entire plan. We're going to start with starting pay. Then we're going to do across-the-board raises in the coming years. And we're going to put additional dollars into merit-based compensation. That's going to be their plan. It's going to be a popular plan, in my opinion. I think it is well-based. It is based on good empirical research about what makes education reform successful. And I think politically that will be fine for them. In fact, I've seen polling on the idea of raising starting pay for teachers. It is extremely popular. And they're going to pass that, and then they're going to go back to the voters in the fall, and they're going to say, look, we did an across-the-board teacher pay raise in 2012. We did not an across-the-board raise, but we did merit raises in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
In 2014, we raised the starting pay of teachers dramatically. And I think the other side will say they hate teachers, they won't give teachers pay raises, and I think that the conservative side will have the better of the argument.
I think you're right. And it's great talking to you.